The doctor's hands were shaking when he handed me the white envelope. His eyes met mine, filled with something between pity and disbelief. "Mrs. Lawson," he said quietly, "you married the wrong twin." I blinked, unsure if I heard him right. "What do you mean, the wrong twin?" He turned the papers around so I could see. The DNA results stared back at me, clear and undeniable. My heart started racing. My palms went cold, and I could barely breathe as the truth sank in. The man I'd been living with, the man I loved, wasn't who I thought he was. If you want to know how I discovered that the person I married wasn't the man I said I do to, stay till the end. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. My name is Ava Lawson, and for 5 years, I thought I had a happy, ordinary marriage. My husband, Ethan, was gentle, funny in his quiet way, and the kind of man who remembered how I liked my coffee every morning. We lived in a small house outside Seattle, surrounded by trees and the sound of rain on the roof every night. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was ours. We met at a charity event where he built furniture to auction for local shelters. He wasn't the kind of man who talked a lot, but when he smiled, it was warm and real. We fell in love quickly. Within a year, we were married in a simple backyard ceremony with fairy lights, homemade food, and the people we loved most. Everyone said we were perfect together, but if you had told me that day that the man standing at the altar wasn't really my husband, I would have laughed. I didn't know that my entire life was built on a lie. For the first few years, everything was good. Ethan ran a small carpentry business, and I worked as a nurse at a nearby clinic. He was quiet but dependable, the kind of man who fixed leaky faucets at midnight without complaining and left notes for me on the fridge before leaving for work. But over time, small things began to feel off, little moments that didn't make sense, but were easy to brush aside. Like the night we were watching an old family video. I asked him why he never talked about his twin brother, Eli. He froze for a second, then said, "Because some people don't deserve to be remembered." I laughed it off, assuming there was bad blood between them, but I couldn't help noticing the look in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Eli was a name that floated through conversations, but never stayed. From what I knew, he'd been the troublemaker of the family, the twin who disappeared years ago after something terrible happened. My mother-in-law, Diane, always changed the subject when I asked about him. Once, I saw her look at Ethan with tears in her eyes and whisper, "You look so much like him." Ethan brushed it off and changed the topic, pretending not to hear. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. Everyone has family secrets. Maybe Ethan's was just one of those things people prefer to leave buried. But then, more cracks began to show. He started forgetting things, important things, our anniversary, the way I take my coffee, even my middle name once. It felt strange because he had always been so attentive. And sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up and find him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at me as if trying to memorize my face. When I asked what was wrong, he'd smile and say, "Nothing, go back to sleep." But his smile never reached his eyes. One evening, while cleaning out the garage, I found an old box tucked behind the shelves. Inside were family photos, birthday cards, and a small wooden cross necklace I'd never seen before. On the back, it was engraved with the name Eli. My stomach tightened. When I asked Ethan about it, his face went blank. "It's nothing," he said too quickly. "Just old stuff from before." "Before what?" I wanted to ask, but something about his tone made me stop. Over the next few weeks, his behavior got stranger. He was quiet at dinner, avoided phone calls from his mother, and became defensive every time I asked questions. Then one morning, he announced he had to take a business trip out of town for a few days. He left early, but that same night, I got a call from his mother asking if Ethan was home. When I told her he was on a trip, she said something that made my heart stop. "Ava, Ethan hasn't been on a trip in 2 years. He doesn't even drive anymore after the accident." I froze. "What accident?" There was silence on the other end. "I shouldn't have said that," she whispered before hanging up. From that moment, everything changed. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was very wrong. I needed answers. I convinced Ethan to take part in a DNA test for a medical insurance policy, hoping it would clear up the confusion. It was supposed to be routine, just a small blood sample sent to the lab. But when the doctor called and asked me to come in alone, I knew it wasn't routine at all. That's when Dr. Hayes handed me the DNA report. I thought it was just a mistake, maybe a mix-up at the lab. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized the truth was far worse than any mistake. The results didn't match Ethan's medical records. They matched his twin brothers. And that was the day my perfect life shattered. When I left the doctor's office, the report trembled in my hands like a living thing. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the DNA papers that claimed my husband wasn't Ethan Lawson at all. My mind couldn't process it. I told myself there had to be a mistake, that maybe the samples got mixed up, or that the doctor was wrong. But deep down, a cold feeling began to grow inside me, the kind that tells you your life is about to fall apart. That evening, I tried to act normal. I made dinner, lit a candle, and waited for Ethan to come home. When he walked through the door, smiling faintly and saying, "Smells good," something inside me twisted. I couldn't even look at him the same way. He sat down, kissed my cheek, and started eating like everything was fine, but I couldn't swallow a single bite. Finally, I set my fork down and asked, "Ethan, can I ask you something?" He looked up. "Sure. Why did you tell me you don't talk to your brother anymore?" The question caught him off guard. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Why are you asking me that?" I've been thinking about it lately," I said carefully. "You said you haven't spoken in years, but your mom told me something different." His expression shifted. "What did she say?" "That you were in an accident, that you don't drive anymore." The color drained from his face. She shouldn't have said that. My heart began to pound. "Why not? What happened in that accident, Ethan?" He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "It's complicated." "Try me," I said, my voice shaking. For a moment, he looked at me with something between anger and fear. Then he walked to the sink, rinsed his plate, and said flatly, "Drop it, Ava." That was the first time he ever spoke to me like that. His voice was cold, unfamiliar. I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed listening to his breathing beside me, wondering if the person next to me was even my husband at all. My mind raced with questions. If this wasn't Ethan, where was the real one? And why would his twin pretend to be him? The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to my mother-in-law's house unannounced. She looked surprised when she opened the door, still wearing her robe. "Ava, is everything all right?" I stepped inside. "No, it's not. I need you to tell me the truth." She hesitated. "About what?" "About Ethan, about Eli, about the accident." Her lips trembled and she turned away. "You shouldn't dig into things you don't understand. Please," I begged. "I need to know who I'm living with." Diane covered her face with her hands and sat down on the couch. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. 2 years ago, there was a car crash. Ethan and Eli were driving home from their father's funeral. The police said it was icy. The car flipped off the road. Ethan died instantly. Eli survived, but barely. I felt my throat tighten. "That's not possible. Ethan's alive. He's at home." She looked up, her eyes red. "No, Ava, that's Eli." The room began to spin. "No," I whispered. "You're wrong." She shook her head slowly. "He came back a few months after the accident. Said he wanted to make things right, to honor his brother. I didn't know he'd taken Ethan's name. I thought he was just helping with your grief. Then one day, he brought you home and said you were married. I tried to stop him, but he begged me not to ruin it." I stumbled backward, my chest tightening. "So the man I married, the man I live with, is his brother?" Diane started crying. "He loved you even before Ethan did. You just never noticed him." I couldn't breathe. My whole life felt like a cruel joke. "You let me marry him," I said, my voice shaking. "You knew." "I thought you'd be happy," she whispered. "He looks just like Ethan. He acts like him. I thought it didn't matter anymore." I turned and walked out before she could say another word. My hands were trembling as I drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, Eli was sitting on the porch, waiting. He stood up when he saw me. "Ava, we need to talk." I got out of the car slowly, the DNA test still in my bag. "Who are you?" I asked. He swallowed hard. Ava, please, no, I shouted. Tell me who you are. He looked down, his voice breaking. I didn't mean to lie to you. I didn't plan for it to happen this way. When Ethan died, I couldn't stand seeing you broken. You loved him so much. I wanted to help, but then you started to look at me the way you looked at him, and I couldn't stop. My heart broke with every word. So you became him? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I just wanted to give you the life you lost. I shook my head, backing away. You didn't give me anything. You stole everything. He reached for me, but I pulled away. Don't touch me. I ran inside, locked the door, and sank to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The man who had kissed me goodnight, held me through storms, and promised forever wasn't my husband at all. He was a stranger wearing my husband's face. As I sat there crying, I realized something else. The accident that took Ethan's life had created another kind of wreckage, one built on lies and stolen love. And now I had to decide what to do with the truth. For the next few days, I barely spoke a word. Every sound in the house felt heavy. The creak of the floor, the ticking clock, even the soft hum of the refrigerator. I moved through each day like a ghost, avoiding him as much as I could. Every time I looked at his face, it tore something inside me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I was afraid of what I might hear. The man I thought I knew, the man I built my life with, was gone. What stood before me was Eli, pretending to be Ethan. He tried to talk to me, but I couldn't bear it. Ava, he said softly one morning, standing in the kitchen doorway. Please, let me explain. I didn't even turn around. You've explained enough, I said coldly. You lied about who you are, about everything. There's nothing left to say. He stepped closer. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I wanted to tell you, but every time I tried, I saw how happy you were. I didn't want to ruin that. I turned to face him, my voice shaking with anger. You didn't want to. Ruin it? You built my happiness on a lie. That's not love, Eli. That's cruelty. He flinched at the sound of his real name. I think it hurt him to hear it, but not nearly as much as it hurt me to say it. That night, I packed a small bag and went to stay with my friend Laura, a fellow nurse from the clinic. I didn't tell her everything, just that my marriage had fallen apart. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a cup of tea and said, "Stay as long as you need." I stayed up all night on her couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory I had of Ethan, every smile, every kiss, every promise, and realizing they all belonged to someone who didn't exist. But even as I tried to cut him out of my life, a part of me still needed answers. How long had he been pretending? Why did no one stop him? Why did his mother, a woman who had seen me as a daughter, let this go on? I couldn't move on without the full truth. So the next morning, I drove back to the Lawson family home. Diane opened the door, startled to see me again. Her eyes were swollen like she hadn't slept. Ava, please, she said softly. You shouldn't be here. I need to see him, I said firmly. I deserve the truth, all of it. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Eli was sitting on the porch out back, staring at the woods behind the house. The morning sun caught his face, and for a brief moment, he looked exactly like the man I married. That hurt more than anything. When he saw me, he stood up slowly. You came back. I crossed my arms. Don't flatter yourself. I came for answers. He nodded, his voice low. Ask me anything. I took a deep breath. Why did you do it? Why pretend to be him? He looked down at his hands. After the crash, I woke up in the hospital. They told me Ethan was gone. I couldn't handle it. I blamed myself for everything. He was always the good one, the one everyone loved. I was the mistake, the twin who never got it right. When I came to the funeral, I saw you standing there, so broken, and I thought, if I could make it right somehow, maybe I could finally be worth something. I stared at him, my heart aching. You thought taking his name would fix that? I thought keeping you happy would, he said, his voice trembling. At first, it was about guilt, but then I started to love you, more than I ever thought I could love anyone. And every day I told myself I'd tell you the truth. But every time I saw you smile, I couldn't. I was selfish, Ava. I didn't want to lose you. I felt tears fill my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You already lost me. The moment you lied, you lost me. He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I know, and I'll live with that. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, the sound of birds in the distance filling the space between us. I took a step closer, studying his face. It was uncanny. Every feature mirrored Ethan's perfectly. But behind those eyes, there was something different. The gentleness was gone, replaced by a pain that seemed to come from years of regret. I need to know one more thing, I said quietly. Was any of it real? The way you held me? The way you looked at me? Was it all part of the lie? He shook his head, his voice breaking. No, Ava. That was the only part that was real. My chest tightened. Then that's the saddest part of all. I turned to leave, but he reached out and grabbed my wrist. Not forcefully, just enough to make me stop. Please, don't hate me, he whispered. I looked back at him, my eyes burning. I don't hate you. I hate what you did. There's a difference. I pulled my hand away and walked back toward my car. Each step felt heavier than the last, but it was also freeing. The weight I'd been carrying for weeks, fear, anger, confusion, finally began to lift. I knew what I had to do now. I couldn't erase what he'd done. I couldn't change the past, but I could reclaim my future. When I got home that night, I gathered the rest of my things and wrote a short note. It simply said, I forgive you, but I can't stay. I left it on the kitchen table, next to our wedding photo. Then I walked out of the house that no longer felt like home. That was the moment I decided to end the lie for good. I filed for annulment the next morning. It was time to stop living in the shadow of a ghost and start living as myself again. The day I signed the annulment papers should have felt like the end, but instead, it felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. The silence in the courthouse was deafening as I handed the documents to the clerk. She stamped them, smiled politely, and said, You're free to go. Free. The word didn't feel real. I walked out into the cold Seattle air, clutching the papers in my hands. The rain had just started again, the kind that fell softly, like the sky was crying with you. For a long time, I just stood there, letting it wash over me, trying to convince myself it was finally over. But a small, restless part of me still wanted one thing: closure. I didn't know if Eli had stayed in town or vanished for good, but I couldn't leave things unfinished. I needed to understand the full truth of what happened that night, the night Ethan died, and Eli decided to take his place. So I drove to the cabin where Ethan used to go fishing, the same one Eli had gone to before I left him. The woods were thick and silent, and the gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up. I saw the faint glow of light coming from inside the cabin window. He was there. I hesitated before knocking, but before my hand reached the door, it opened. Eli stood there, looking older, more fragile. His eyes were tired, his face unshaven. I didn't think you'd come back, he said quietly. I didn't either, I replied. He stepped aside, and I walked in. The cabin was small, warm. From the fireplace, on the table sat a worn photo album, the same one we used to look through together. I noticed the last page had a new picture, Ethan and Eli as kids, sitting side by side, their arms around each other. It broke something inside me. Eli followed my gaze. That was the last photo we ever took together, he said softly. I used to hate looking at it, but now it's the only thing that feels real. I turned to face him. You've told me a lot, but not everything. I need to know how it really happened. The accident. What made you decide to become him? He exhaled slowly, his voice trembling. Ethan called me that day. We hadn't spoken in years. He wanted to fix things between us. I was driving when we crashed. I was the one behind the wheel. I walked away with nothing but scars, and he didn't. When I saw his body in the hospital, I couldn't accept it. I kept hearing his last words. You always get a second chance, Eli. Don't waste it. So I didn't. I felt a lump in my throat. You think pretending to be him was your second chance? I didn't think. I just acted. I thought I was honoring him. I told myself it was for you, but deep down, I was selfish. I wanted the life he had, the love he had. I wanted to see what it felt like to be him, the good twin. The words hit me like a wave. You were never the bad twin, Eli. You were just lost. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but I crossed a line that can't be undone. We stood in silence for a while, the fire crackling between us. I realized then that no apology could fix what he had done, but for the first time, I saw the man behind the lie, not the imposter who stole my life, but a broken soul drowning in guilt. I didn't come here for an apology, I said finally. I came here to say goodbye. You need to let Ethan rest, and I need to let go of both of you. Eli nodded slowly, tears filling his eyes. You're stronger than either of us ever were. I walked toward the door, pausing when I reached it. What will you do now? He shrugged weakly. I'll disappear. Maybe I'll finally stop trying to be someone I'm not. I looked back one last time. For what it's worth, I believe you did love me, but love doesn't make lies right. He smiled sadly. I know. That's why I'm not asking you to forgive me. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a thin mist hung over the trees. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of wet pine and wood smoke. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest began to lift. As I walked back to my car, I thought about the life I'd lived with him, the laughter, the arguments, the small moments that had felt so real. And I realized something. Maybe they were real in their own way. Because even though his love began as a lie, the way I had loved him was true. That was mine. No one could take that from me. When I got home that night, I took the last of our wedding photos off the wall. I didn't cry this time. I simply placed them in a box, closed it, and put it away in the attic. Some memories belong in the past, no matter how much they once meant. Later, as I sat on my porch with a blanket around my shoulders, I looked up at the stars breaking through the clouds. For the first time since the doctor handed me that envelope, I didn't feel lost. I felt ready to rebuild, to rediscover who I was before the lies, and to live a life that was truly mine. In that quiet moment, I whispered to myself, "You're free, Ava, finally free." And I meant it. The morning after I said goodbye to Eli, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel heavy. I brewed myself a cup of coffee, opened the window, and watched the world turn from gray to gold. The air outside smelled of rain and pine, and for the first time, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from pretending everything is fine, but the kind that comes from finally accepting the truth. It had been 3 weeks since I last saw him. After our final conversation at the cabin, he disappeared completely. No messages, no calls, no trace. I didn't need to ask where he went or what he planned to do. The man I once loved, the man who had stolen another man's name, was gone, and I wasn't sure which version of him had left, the liar, or the one finally ready to face himself. Maybe both. At first, I struggled with the silence. I'd walk into the kitchen and still expect to hear his voice, or find his boots by the door. Grief is strange that way. It doesn't disappear when the person does. It lingers in the spaces they once filled. But every day, I tried to fill those spaces with something new, something real. I started volunteering at a support group for women recovering from emotional trauma. Listening to their stories made me realize how many people carried secret pain, different shapes of heartbreak, all hidden behind polite smiles. I didn't tell them mine right away, but when I finally did, there was no pity in their eyes, only understanding. One woman hugged me and said, "You didn't lose your life, Ava. You just got the chance to start living it for the first time." That sentence stayed with me. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to the city, a place with white walls, wooden floors, and big windows that let the sunlight pour in. I painted the walls myself, hung photos of the beach and mountains, and bought plants I knew I'd forget to water. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every choice I made was my own. Sometimes I still thought about Ethan, the real Ethan, the man who never got to live the life he deserved. I'd visit his grave once a month, always bringing the same thing, a small wooden charm shaped like a heart. It was something Eli carved for me in our first year together, before the truth shattered everything. It was one of the few things I decided to keep, not because of the lie, but because it reminded me that even broken things can carry beauty. On one of those visits, I met Diane there. She looked older, frailer than I remembered. We stood in silence for a while before she finally said, "He sent me a letter." My stomach tightened. "Eli?" She nodded, holding out a folded piece of paper. He said he's leaving the country, somewhere quiet. He wants to start over. I took the letter, but I didn't open it right away. Do you think he's really changed? Diane sighed. He's my son. I think he's finally learning what that word means. I looked down at Ethan's grave, the name carved clean and simple. I think that's what we're all trying to learn, I said quietly. After she left, I sat alone by the headstone and finally unfolded Eli's letter. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places. Ava, I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that loving you changed me. I spent my life running from who I was, hiding behind my brother, my mistakes, my guilt. You showed me what it meant to be seen, even when I didn't deserve it. I'll carry that lesson with me wherever I go. Please live the life I never gave you, the honest one. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it under a small stone beside Ethan's grave. I didn't cry this time. I didn't need to. There was peace in knowing the story had finally ended, not with revenge or regret, but with truth. Over time, the pain turned into something quieter, something I could live with. I learned to cook for one again, to laugh at my own jokes, to walk through the park without feeling someone should be beside me. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you lost along the way. A few months later, I returned to my job at the clinic full-time. One afternoon, as I was helping a young couple fill out medical forms, the woman smiled at me and said, "You must love your job. You seem so calm, like nothing could shake you." I smiled back. "I've had my share of storms," I said, "but you learned to find your footing again." That night, I drove to the coast alone. The ocean was calm, the sky streaked with pale pink and gold. I kicked off my shoes and walked into the shallow waves. The water was cold, but it felt cleansing, like a promise to myself that I wouldn't let anyone else define my story again. I realized that I had spent so much of my life being someone's something, someone's wife, someone's comfort, someone's secret. But now, for the first time, I was just me, and that was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered to the wind, "Goodbye, Ethan. Goodbye, Eli." The waves pulled the words away, carrying them out to sea. When I turned back toward the shore, I felt light, not healed, not perfect, but free. And if there's one thing I learned through all of it, it's that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a beautiful lie. Because only when you face it can you finally start living the life that belongs to you. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and comment below where you're watching from. And remember, no matter how broken your story feels, there's always a chapter waiting to begin again.